All right, we're doing another one of these. Hope you like the new background. Just kind of figuring this whole thing out as we go. But I couldn't stay away because I was listening to the Bulwark podcast from this past Friday. They had on guest was David Frum, who, if you are not familiar, was a speechwriter for George W. Bush. He's a Canadian American, and he's kind of one of those guys who is, a former neocon from the Bush era, big free market conservative guy, but now he is still a free market and free trade kind of guy, but a classic liberal, anti-Trump all the way. And he said something that really stuck with me, which is that America spent its first 150 years as a nation that, on the one hand, was a complete totalitarian nightmare, and on the other hand, was a beacon of freedom and a land of freedom. And all you had to do to know which side of that coin you were on was to look at your wrist and see the color of your skin. That stuck with me a lot because I feel like it's important to remember that America has been a totalitarian nightmare in the past. Not for all citizens, but for some. And we managed to work our way slowly and painfully out of that reality and become more liberal and freer. We became better at respecting civil rights and civil liberties. We increased civil rights and civil liberties for more people, and we opened the door to increase participation in our democratic process. All those things are very important in bringing us to where we are today. But right now, it looks like we're heading backwards and closer to that totalitarian mindset. I think yesterday was a big inflection point. It was small and subtle, as many of these inflection points are, but it was definitely real. I'm not going to use the names of the individuals involved because I just want you to listen to my words and not think about who's involved here and your prior thoughts on them. I want you to think about what my words mean on balance without prior knowledge of the players here. So the president, after launching a global trade war and tanking the stock market and increasing our risk of a recession, brought into the Oval Office his only real ally on the world stage right now, a Central American dictator who runs a mega prison in El Salvador for that is known for starving its occupants, for torture, and is actually closer to what we would call a gulag or maybe even a concentration camp than we would a prison. But that prison is a place where our government has, by its own admission, sent at least one person in error. Think about that for a moment, that they have sent at least one person in error. That means that we don't really know who a lot of the other people there are, what their crimes, alleged crimes were, what the evidence was against them. Did they get due process? Who knows? Are there other people there like this man who was disappeared without a single criminal charge, who's lived and worked in the United States for 15 years? He was alleged to be a member of a Central American gang based on a state that he never lived in by an anonymous FBI informant. There was no other evidence. There was no trial for this man, no conviction, no jury of his peers. Nothing but a legal order that he was to be deported to this El Salvador prison, where he is now serving a life sentence for a crime that we don't have evidence he committed. We don't even know what the crime is. The Supreme Court just ruled in this case that 9-0, by the way. This court does not rule 9-0 very often. And it voted 9-0 that the government must facilitate this man's release. Facilitate's the important word there, and it's what the Trump administration is using to get around it. But the president and his dictator friend said no. They laughed about it. They made fun of the journalist who asked the question. Caitlin Collins, a very well-known and respected reporter, and the president asked why she couldn't just be happy that he's deporting criminals. They asked why this man was not being brought back to the United States and if he would be brought back and if they would abide by the court's orders. In this room, in the Oval Office, were the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, and the White House Deputy Chief. All of them lied about the facts of the case, calling this man a criminal, and part of a gang, which there is no evidence that he is. And then the president repeated his proposal to send American citizens to this El Salvador dictator's prison. And he asked the dictator to build 5 more because he would need to send homegrown ones there. Homegrown American criminals. Even if you're a criminal, you are still a citizen of the United States, and there are certain laws and rights afforded to you. Being rendered to a gulag in El Salvador is not one of them. So that's one side of it. But that same day, we found out that the government had knowingly disappeared a PhD student for nothing but signing on to an op-ed. A man's 19-year-old son who agents admitted was the wrong guy, and a visa-holding Russian scientist at Harvard who forgot to declare frog embryos at the border. 3 different situations where people were wrongly captured by the authorities to be deported. The MAGA right and Trump's White House, we'll use the name, it's fine. I think we all know who we're talking about, are defending this by doing the most offensive whataboutism of all time. They've been doing this for a couple weeks now. They say, what about Laken Riley? Where was her due process? Well, people who get murdered don't get due process because they've been murdered, but the person who is accused of murdering them does get due process. Laken Riley's murderer did get due process in order to afford justice, not to her because she's been murdered, but to her family, to her friends. That's how this works. They accuse us of wanting criminals in the country. They say that these people don't deserve due process because they're criminals. They don't get due process because they are criminals. So how do you know they're criminals without due process? You're just telling us that they are? The first point here is that they're just lying. That's the easiest way to understand this. There's no evidence that any of these people are criminals. The 4 that I'm talking about. There are certainly criminals that they've deported, but not these. But the second part is the presentation of evidence is part of due process, and you can't arrive at a conclusion that a person is a criminal without due process. It's not possible. And if due process no longer matters, then the rule of law no longer matters, and every single one of us, citizens, non-citizens alike, are vulnerable to Trump's whims and to the whims of Stephen Miller or to Steve Bannon or any of the other right-wing kooks that he has in his White House. And make no mistake, they are kooks, but they are kooks who know how to do this stuff. They are not the goobers that were part of the first administration. These are very serious people. The one bright spot is that this stuff is finally starting to break through. I was a little worried for a few weeks, I would say 2 or 3 weeks now, that Democrats would be too afraid to speak out on this issue because some pollster tells them that immigration is not a winner for them, or they're worried that they're going to speak out in defense of one of these folks and then it's going to turn out that they actually were part of a gang and they'd look like a fool. But this is starting to get coverage because it is an inflection point of denying a court order from the Supreme Court 9-0, outright flouting that order, and entertaining the idea of deporting citizens to a foreign country, to a foreign gulag. So this is starting to get more coverage and more people are paying attention to it. More elected Democrats are feeling emboldened to speak up. That's good. Alongside them, more conservative pundits, who aren't fully into the MAGA cult, who do still believe in the rule of law, and other legal scholars are speaking up as well. You even have Joe Rogan calling this inhumane. All right, so Joe Rogan is on the side of the rule of law here, just if we're keeping score. It's a big tent party we're trying to build, people. But this is a moment for us to keep pushing. We can't let this die out. This is much bigger than just immigration or one deportation policy, or it's much bigger than just one person. This is about what it means fundamentally to be American. It is about whether or not laws matter. And it is about whether or not we live in a free country or in a totalitarian police state where the president's word goes and there is nothing you can do about it. The argument that the president can do what he wants in this situation because a court cannot control the president's foreign policy is on its face ridiculous as well. So the president can kidnap an American citizen and fly them out over the Atlantic Ocean and shoot them and dump them out of the helicopter or the plane because they're conducting foreign policy. Is that what we want? Is that where we're at? I want to live in a free country. I want to live in a country that respects the rule of law. And one of the hardest things about living in a country where laws matter, where process matters, where the justice system matters, is that that system isn't designed to convict as many people as possible. It's designed to ensure that process is respected so that innocents aren't wrongfully convicted. Because people may not believe this, but the greatest danger to a legal system of justice is abuses like imprisoning innocent people. I want bad people to go to prison and I want criminals punished. But I would trade some bad people going free before accepting wrongful imprisonments of innocent people, especially American citizens. That's the entire point of due process. Because once you open the door to convicting citizens without due process, you're opening the door to unlimited power for the president, for the police, and for anyone else in power to wield that power as they see fit. I visited Hungary last year. It's a beautiful country, and I highly recommend taking the trip there if you have time. But I can say with conviction that it's not a country that I want to live in, and we are on track to becoming just like Hungary, just with a lot more guns and nuclear weapons. I love America, which is why I have a big fat American flag back here. I'm proud to be an American. I love football. I love baseball. I'm all into the whole back-to-back World War champion shtick. I get choked up watching Saving Private Ryan, the Normandy landing. We Were Soldiers, American Sniper. I got this freaking Bruce Springsteen hat on, Bruce Springsteen trucker hat. I love Miller Lite. There's never been a Miller Lite that wanted to see me coming. I love my country so much that I desperately wanted to continue living up to its values that are laid down in the Constitution and that have been amended over time as we became more inclusive, liberal society. I wouldn't be this pissed off and talking at a computer screen if I didn't care about my country. And so while I fear for the future of the United States as a free country and a beacon of hope to the rest of the world, I don't believe that future is gone. Not forever, at least. We came back from half a society that was free and half that was a totalitarian nightmare. We can come back from this. So that future and that light hasn't been completely snuffed out, but it's on us to make sure that it doesn't go away forever. Everyone has different methods of resistance, but whatever yours is, we need to tap into it now and resist this regime while we still can. It can't just be, working class folks taking to the streets, because those are the people who have the most to lose. And yet they still get out and march and protest and speak out. The rich and powerful, individuals and businesses, universities especially, need to stand together and say that we will not bow down to a king. We have no kings in this country. This is the United States. That's our whole vibe. We fought a war to rid ourselves of the yoke of a monarch. We will not return to a monarch. So write your representative, call their office, and go to town halls and rallies. AOC and Bernie come to your town. Go see them and go scream your head off. Go feel good. Let people know in Trump's party that what is happening is wrong. It is unacceptable, and you will not stand for it. Let them see how truly outnumbered they are, because they are outnumbered. There are more of us than there are of them, but we need to show them that. Maybe they won't care, but some of them might. There's not going to be a cavalry that comes to save us. And there won't be one single Rubicon that Trump will cross out in the open to envelop us into fascism or whatever autocratic term you want to use. It'll be slow, subtle, maybe even boring. And then all at once, you'll realize that it's too late. Let's make sure that we don't get to that point.